Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The morning sun had barely climbed over the ridges of Silver Creek, and already the air shimmered with the promise of heat. Dust rose like ghosts between the firing platforms, coating boots, rifles, and pride alike. It was the kind of morning that separated the dreamers from the doers, the ones who talked about precision from those who lived it. And there she stood. Cadet Alyssa Trent, 22 years old, 5'7", olive complexion, hazel eyes that missed nothing. No one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. What's she doing here? Among the hard-faced men of the Marine Corps, elite marksmanship course, she looked like an anomaly, too quiet, too clean, too unassuming. And yet, something in the stillness around her made even the most decorated instructors uneasy. They just didn't know why. "Got ourselves a beauty queen playing soldier today, gentlemen," barked Staff Sergeant Walsh, his voice a hammer wrapped in sarcasm. He'd been in the Corps for 20 years, and his presence carried the gravity of battlefields half the room would never see. "Let's see if she can at least carry our gear without breaking a nail." Laughter rippled through the lineup. Alyssa said nothing. She simply adjusted the strap of her pack, heavier than regulation by at least 20 pounds, she suspected, and kept her posture perfect. They'd loaded her down deliberately, a test cloaked as cruelty. She knew it, and she let them. "Attention on deck." The laughter died instantly as Captain Rivera approached, clipboard in hand, every movement efficient and deliberate. The man was a legend, 3 tour, 2 citations for valor, and a reputation for knowing who would break before they did. "At ease," he said, scanning the formation. His eyes passed across the line of hardened Marines, pausing just briefly on Alyssa before moving on. "Welcome to Silver Creek Advanced Marksmanship Training. You're here because someone believes you have what it takes. Some of you anyway." Another low chuckle rolled through the ranks. Alyssa didn't blink. Her face remained unreadable, but the faint tightening of her jaw said enough. "Today," Rivera continued, "we separate the shooters from the spectators." He turned toward the distant range. "Your target is at 4,550 meters." A collective exhale followed. That distance was absurd. Impossible, even. It was where math stopped being math and started being faith. Walsh's voice cut through the murmurs. "Trent." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Step forward." She obeyed 2 paces, perfect form. "Since you're our special guest," he said, "you'll get special duties, carry rifles, clean optics, fetch ammo. Think you can handle that, Princess?" The laughter this time was louder, but underneath it, there was tension, the kind that comes when everyone senses the line between fairness and abuse blurring, but no one dares to intervene. "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Alyssa answered, voice steady. "You're not here to shoot," Walsh added, leaning close enough that she could smell the coffee and Copenhagen on his breath. "You're here to serve those who can. That hardware's too expensive for recruits to break." He turned away, dismissing her. The morning wore on, the temperature climbing past tolerable. The instructors took their turns on the line, one by one, attempting the impossible shot. Each miss echoed through the valley like a question no one wanted to answer. "Goddamn winds shifting in 3 directions," grumbled Master Sergeant Peterson, the oldest of the group, sweat dripping from his temple as he adjusted his scope again. Alyssa moved quietly among them, collecting brass, replacing magazines, cleaning dust from optics, a ghost in fatigues. Yet her eyes were everywhere, watching how the mirage bent through the spotting scopes, watching the distant flags, each telling a different story at a different elevation, feeling the subtle temperature shifts on her skin. "2 Moa left adjustment," she whispered under her breath as Peterson prepared to fire. He paused. "What was that, Boot?" "Nothing, Master Sergeant," she replied softly. "Just counting rounds." He fired, missed but not by much, closer than before. By midday, morale had soured. Not a single round had touched the distant steel. Walsh's patience snapped first. "This is why we don't waste time putting women behind precision rifles," he barked loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can't handle the math or the pressure." Alyssa bent to collect a casing, eyes fixed on the ground. But one man, Lieutenant Rodriguez, younger, quieter, less sure of his place among the veterans, saw it. That flicker in her expression. Not hurt, not anger, calculation. By the time the sun dipped low enough to bleed across the range, even Rivera himself had tried and failed. When his final shot missed by half a meter, the captain stood silently, broke down his rifle and said only, "Some targets are just beyond reach." The group began packing up. Walsh turned toward Alyssa, who still stood near the firing line, gaze fixed on the far horizon. "Something interesting out there, cadet." "No, Staff Sergeant." "Maybe you think you could do better." "No, Staff Sergeant." "Then pick up that gear and move out. We don't have all day." As she reached for a rifle case, a small notebook slipped from her pocket. Walsh snatched it up before she could react, flipping through the pages. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "Ballistic observation, Staff Sergeant." "Playing pretend sniper on my range," he sneered, tearing out a handful of pages and letting them scatter into the wind. "When I want your opinion on ballistics, I'll ask, which will be never." He threw the book at her feet. The men followed him toward the trucks, leaving her kneeling alone in the dust, collecting the torn pages. Only Rodriguez lingered, crouching beside her. "That's some detailed work," he said quietly, glancing at the equations. "Thank you, sir. Where'd you learn all this?" "My father taught me." Rodriguez nodded, studying her handwriting, the precision, the structure. This wasn't idle scribbling. It was science. And at the bottom of one page he caught a set of firing solutions so complex and elegant it stopped him cold. He said nothing, but the thought stayed with him. That night in the barracks, Walsh gathered the class for next day's briefing. "Tomorrow, same target," he growled. "And I'll make this interesting. Anyone who hits it gets a month's pay out of my pocket." The room laughed, except Alyssa, whose pen scratched quietly across her rebuilt notebook. Later, when the lights dimmed and the laughter faded, she sat alone under the faint hum of the barracks, single working bulb. Her fingers traced the scar above her eyebrow, a small, faded reminder of a childhood spent learning things most kids never would. A flash of memory, Texas Hill Country, 9 years old, the sound of cicadas and her father's calm voice beside her. "The bullet only knows physics, Alicat. It doesn't care who pulls the trigger." He said it like gospel, and she'd believed him ever since. She opened her notebook again, rewriting every torn calculation from memory: wind drift, barometric pressure, heat mirage correction, elevation angle, Coriolis adjustment. Her handwriting was steady, unhurried. Outside, Silver Creek slept, but Alyssa didn't. She ran the numbers again and again until the lines blurred into something beautiful, a picture only she could see. The invisible geometry of flight. At 300, she closed the notebook and whispered, "It's not impossible." Because she knew the range wasn't beating them. They were beating themselves. By dawn, the desert air was razor sharp, cold enough to sting the lungs. The cadre assembled again at the firing line, their breath fogging in the half-light. Walsh's voice broke the silence. "Trent." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Equipment duty again. Think you can handle that, or should I find someone with more upper body strength?" "I can handle it, Staff Sergeant." He smirked. "We'll see." Inside the equipment shed, she worked alone. The racks of rifles gleamed like sleeping serpents under fluorescent light. Her hands moved with a precision that came from years of ritual. Disassemble, inspect, clean, reassemble. Every click of a bolt, every rotation of a screw was an act of meditation. Rodriguez entered quietly, watching from the doorway. "That's not standard procedure," he said after a moment. "No, sir." The way you check the crown on that barrel, that's competition-level inspection. She hesitated. My father was particular about maintenance, sir. The same father who taught you ballistics. She nodded once. Rodriguez stepped closer, lowering his voice. I checked your file last night. You were rejected from this program twice before, then suddenly approved 3 weeks ago. Curious timing, wouldn't you say? I improved my qualifications, sir. Your scores were already top percentile, he replied. And your father's name, it's redacted. Silence. Rodriguez smiled faintly. Walsh is old school. He feels threatened by you even if he won't admit it. With respect, sir, I'm just here to learn. Sure you are, he murmured, then left her to her work. When the door closed, she allowed herself one small exhale, not relief, just recalibration. She reached into her pocket, touching the worn silver dollar her father had given her years ago. The bullet only knows physics. By 7:30, all rifles were cleaned and aligned perfectly for inspection. When Peterson passed by, he gave a curt nod. Walsh only smirked. But as Alyssa followed them out to the range, she felt something shift in the air, not just the weather but the mood. Today something would change. She didn't know how, only that it would. And deep down she was ready. Why did everyone stop laughing when she picked up the rifle? The second day at Silver Creek began before sunrise, the world painted in cold blue and steel gray. The air was thin, carrying the faint tang of oil, metal, and desert dust. Alyssa was already awake, long before reveille. She sat on her bunk, boots laced, uniform immaculate, listening to the faint hum of generators outside. Every morning was the same ritual: precision, control, order. Because order was what kept the chaos away. By the time the other cadets stirred, she'd already completed her routine, bed tight enough to bounce a coin, hair perfectly tucked beneath her cap. No wasted motion, no wasted time. At 500, she was at the range shed, running through the inventory before the instructors even arrived. When Walsh entered, his voice carried the usual edge of disdain. Trent, ammo ready. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Then stop pretending you're running NASA and move your ass. He tossed a clipboard under the table and stalked off. Alyssa didn't flinch. She simply marked the checklist, loaded the crates, and stepped into the morning light. The others followed later, bleary-eyed and grumbling. And as the sun began to rise, the range shimmered again, a battlefield of heat, mirage, and expectation. Today, Walsh announced, we find out who's got steel in their veins and who's got excuses in their mouths. He paced in front of them, chin high, hands clasped behind his back. The target remains the same, 4,550 meters. That's 2¾ miles of wind, physics, and heartbreak. If that scares you, there's the gate. No one moved. Walsh smirked. Didn't think so. Trent, gear duty again. I want Alpha Team's equipment ready in 10 minutes. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Alyssa jogged to the shed, the echo of his words trailing her. She didn't need 10 minutes. She needed silence and focus. Both she had in abundance. She worked fast, methodical, careful not to let her mind drift. But even as she cleaned the rifles, something kept replaying in her head. Yesterday's failures, the heat waves, the calculations no one had wanted to hear. They'd missed because they refused to listen. She'd seen the answer dancing in the air like a secret whisper. And she couldn't unsee it. When Lieutenant Rodriguez entered the shed 20 minutes later, she was finishing the last rifle. Not standard procedure again, he observed, the same quiet tone as before. No, sir. You're checking microburrs on the crown. Yes, sir. Even minor deformities shift gas flow symmetry, affecting flight stability. Rodriguez studied her, impressed despite himself. And you learned that where? She hesitated, eyes still on the weapon. My father taught me. He said the barrel's crown is like a fingerprint, one flaw, and the whole shot changes character. Rodriguez smiled faintly. Sounds like a man who knew what he was talking about. He did. Then he'd be proud of the way you work. She didn't reply. He turned to leave but paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, Walsh is losing his patience with you, which means you're doing something right. When he left, she allowed herself a single small exhale, not relief, but focus sharpening. By 7:30, she had the equipment arranged perfectly for the instructor's inspection. Every weapon gleamed, every optic aligned with mathematical precision. Even Master Sergeant Peterson, the old warhorse of the group, gave a grudging nod. At least the princess can clean a weapon, Walsh said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter came again, tired and predictable. But this time, Cadet Thompson, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a Ranger tab on his sleeve, didn't laugh. He'd been watching her since day one, quiet, observant, detached from the noise. When the group broke for water, he approached her. "They're trying to break you," he said simply. She didn't look up. "Is it working?" Thompson smiled. "Not even close, but Walsh isn't used to cadets who don't flinch." "I'm not here to impress Staff Sergeant Walsh." "Then why are you here?" Her answer came without hesitation. "To learn to earn." He nodded slowly, respect flickering in his eyes. "Fair enough." Before she could say more, Walsh's bark tore through the air. "Trent, ammo to position 3 now." She moved fast, efficient, invisible. The morning dragged into blistering heat. The instructors demonstrated techniques. The cadets mimicked them. And Alyssa, always just behind the line, always watching, absorbed every detail. When the Alpha Team instructors began their long-range drills, the tension returned. One by one, they missed. The bullets vanished into the shimmering void, swallowed by wind and distance. "Range control confirm," Walsh snapped into the radio. "Negative impact," came the reply. Again and again, miss after miss. Alyssa moved beside Rodriguez, carrying ammunition. Her mind worked faster than her hands. "Vertical wind stratum at 3,000 meters is causing consistent rightward drift," she murmured, almost to herself. Rodriguez turned his head sharply. "What was that?" She froze. "Nothing, sir." "No, say it again." "The wind is moving in 3 layers. Mirage shows opposite directions between 2 and 3,500 meters. It's pushing rounds right at final approach." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then looked through his own scope. She was right. The shimmer, the distortion, even the dust at varying distances, it all aligned with her theory. "That's a complex read for someone who hasn't fired a shot," he said quietly. "I've been watching." He didn't reply, but something changed in his expression. Later that afternoon, when Peterson adjusted for his next shot, Alyssa's voice came again, low, careful. "Your elevation's correct, but heat refraction, making the distance behave shorter than measured. 4680 effective, not 4850. The firing line froze. Walsh turned slowly. "Did you just correct a master sergeant, cadet?" "No, staff sergeant, just an observation." "Then keep it to yourself." But Peterson hesitated, then adjusted slightly and fired. The impact was closer than any shot all day, barely off-center. He lowered the rifle, eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "Noted," he said simply. Walsh's glare could have cut steel. "Trent, you're done here. Clean every rifle on this line by 2100. You want to act like an expert, you'll work like one." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." As she gathered the weapons, Rodriguez fell in step beside her. That was either brave or stupid. She met his gaze. "Is there a difference here, sir?" He chuckled softly. "Fair point." Then, after a pause, "Meet me at 500, back gate to the range. I want to see something." "Sir." "You'll see." That night, under the flickering light of the equipment shed, Alyssa worked until her hands were raw. Carbon residue clung to her skin like ash. Her uniform was streaked with oil and solvent. But her mind was somewhere else, replaying Peterson's near hit. The pattern, the math. It wasn't luck, it was physics. And she could prove it. When Major Blackwood entered unexpectedly, she stood at attention instantly. "At ease," he said, inspecting her work. "Impressive, not the cleaning, the way you handled Walsh." "I wasn't aware I'd handled him, sir." "You didn't lose your composure, that's rare here." He paused, eyes narrowing. "I reviewed your personnel file, Cadet. It's unusual, redactions, anomalies." "I can't explain what I don't know, sir." "Can't or woe?" "Either, sir." He studied her for a long moment, then smiled thinly. "Tomorrow you'll demonstrate weapon assembly blindfolded. 3 minutes. Fail and you're out of the advanced course." "Yes, sir." He left. The silence afterward was heavy, but not oppressive. It was the kind of silence that sharpened resolve. Alyssa placed the last cleaned rifle on the rack and whispered to herself, "Preparation isn't punishment." She returned to her quarters past midnight. The barracks were dark except for a sliver of moonlight through the blinds. She sat on her bunk, opened her notebook, and wrote in neat, tight script. Wind strata, 3 layers, heat refraction variable, human bias constant. Her pen paused. Then below the notes she wrote something else, words her father had told her years ago, after her first failed competition. "Some targets aren't missed because of distance, Alicat. They're missed because no one believes they can be hit." She stared at the page for a long time. Then, with calm precision, she flipped to a blank sheet and began to plan. Not for tomorrow's blindfold test. For the shot no one believed possible. At dawn, Silver Creek stirred awake to the sound of boots on gravel. The desert sky burned gold, and the air carried a promise, or maybe a warning. The cadets assembled before Major Blackwood, rifles laid out in neat disarray. He gestured to a disassembled TAC-338 sniper rifle on the table. "Precision weapon maintenance can mean the difference between mission success and death," he announced. "Cadet Trent will demonstrate under time pressure, blindfolded, 3 minutes." A murmur ran through the group. Even the instructors shifted uneasily. It was a near-impossible task, requiring flawless muscle memory and instinct. Alyssa stepped forward without hesitation. Blackwood held out a black cloth. "Time starts when the blindfold goes on." She tied it around her eyes. The world went dark. "Begin." The timer beeped. Her hands moved instantly. No fumbling, no pause. Trigger assembly, bolt housing, firing pin alignment. Each click echoed like a heartbeat. 2 minutes passed. Then, with a final metallic snap, she set the rifle on the table. "Clear," she said. Blackwood stared at the assembled weapon, then at the timer. 2 minutes, 17 seconds. He inspected the rifle, checked the bolt, the action, the safety. Perfect. "Function check," he ordered. She performed it flawlessly, each motion practiced to the rhythm of breath. The silence afterward was profound. Even Walsh said nothing. Finally Peterson broke it. "Damn fine work." Blackwood nodded slowly. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My father taught me, sir." "And who was your father?" "A Marine, sir." He held her gaze. "So it seems." Behind them, Walsh's expression was unreadable. Not anger, not yet, but something deeper. Doubt. And that, Alyssa thought, was the first crack in the wall. How could silence sound louder than a gunshot? The night before it happened, Silver Creek was restless. The wind moaned through the canyons, kicking dust against the barracks windows. Inside, Alyssa lay awake, eyes open, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling. Tomorrow would change everything. She knew it before it even began. Not because of what Walsh had said. Not because of Blackwood's challenge, but because of what she felt deep inside. That quiet, unshakable certainty that comes only when the world doubts you completely. At 4:45 she rose. No alarm, no hesitation. The barracks slept. The world outside was still wrapped in cold pre-dawn silence. She dressed quickly, tying her hair tight beneath her cap, and slipped out through the back corridor. Every sound felt amplified, the soft crunch of gravel under her boots, the metallic creak of the gate as she eased it open. Lieutenant Rodriguez was already there, standing by the edge of the range. Beside him, the towering figure of Master Sergeant Peterson. Both men turned as she approached. "Morning, Cadet," Peterson said gruffly. "You ready to put your money where your mouth is?" "Yes, Master Sergeant." Rodriguez gestured toward the firing platform. "We've got 1 hour before anyone else arrives. Make it count." The words hung in the air like a dare. The sky was pale gray, streaked with the first traces of dawn. The air was still, no wind, no heat, no distortion. Perfect shooting conditions. The kind that lasted minutes, not hours. Alyssa took her place behind the Macmillan TAC 338. The rifle felt heavy but familiar, like an extension of her own body. She exhaled slowly, letting her nerves settle. Rodriguez and Peterson exchanged a look, part curiosity, part disbelief. She wasn't supposed to be here, not yet. "Target at 4550, Peterson said, aligning his spotter scope. "Same as yesterday. Center mass counts as a hit." Alyssa nodded, eyes narrowing behind the scope. The landscape ahead stretched endlessly, a barren valley of heat-baked rock and whispering wind. The target, a steel silhouette, was barely visible against the horizon. But she could see it. Every shimmer, every distortion, every pattern of light and air between here and there. She started her calculations silently, her mind unfolding a map of invisible forces. Barometric pressure, air density, mirage movement at upper strata. Her breathing slowed, her pulse dropped. The world contracted until there was nothing left but her, the rifle, and the target. "You've got 15 minutes, Rodriguez said quietly. "After that, we were never here." She didn't answer. Her fingers adjusted the scope, half clicks, barely perceptible. Then, with surgical precision, she turned the elevation turret and dialed in the correction she'd spent nights perfecting. Peterson muttered under his breath, watching her. "That's not standard procedure." "No, Master Sergeant," she replied calmly. "It's not." Rodriguez crossed his arms. "You sure about that firing solution?" "Yes, sir." A small pause, then "Send it." She inhaled once, deep and steady, then exhaled slow enough to calm a heartbeat. The rifle's stock settled into her shoulder. The crosshairs danced, then steadied. And in that breathless moment, time itself seemed to hold still. Click. Crack. The shot broke the dawn like thunder. The recoil pushed against her, firm and familiar. She didn't blink. Through the scope, she followed the bullet's long, impossible flight, 10 seconds that felt like eternity. "Impact," Peterson whispered, his voice barely audible. "Edge of center mass, that's a hit." Rodriguez blinked, stunned. "Confirm." Peterson leaned into the scope again. "Confirmed. Edge of center, 4,550 meters. Sweet mother of." He stopped himself, shaking his head in disbelief. "Do it again." Alyssa's face was calm. No excitement, no triumph, just focus. "Permission to confirm 0 with a second shot," she said quietly. "Granted," Peterson replied, still reeling. "Make it count." She made one tiny correction, 2 clicks left, 1 down. Then she waited. The mirage shifted slightly at the horizon. She adjusted for it instinctively, feeling it more than seeing it. Then she breathed. And fired again. The rifle cracked through the still air. "Impact," Peterson said after a long pause. "Center mass." He exhaled, finally looking up from the scope. "Dead center. That's perfect." Rodriguez stared at her. Who the hell taught you to shoot like that? Alyssa lowered the rifle, her expression unreadable. My father. Before either man could respond, Rodriguez hissed, vehicle approaching. They moved instantly. Peterson grabbed the spotting scope, Rodriguez cleared the casings, Alyssa secured the rifle. Within 30 seconds, the firing line looked untouched. We were never here, Rodriguez reminded her. Yes, sir. As they slipped away through the side gate, Peterson stopped her briefly, his voice lower than usual. Trent. Master Sergeant. That was the best damn shooting I've seen in 20 years. He paused, his eyes fierce but sincere. Whatever happens next, remember that. She nodded once. Yes, Master Sergeant. By the time they returned to the base, the sun had climbed above the ridge, burning away the last traces of dawn. At precisely 900, Alyssa stood at attention before Major Blackwood and the junior cadets for the day's training session. Her face betrayed nothing. Her left shoulder still carried the faint ache of recoil. Cadet Trent, Blackwood said, gesturing toward the table, you'll be demonstrating basic marksmanship for the new recruits. The rifle on the bench wasn't a precision TAC-338. It was an M4 standard issue, basic. Yes, sir, she replied. He folded his arms. 5 rounds, 300 meters, show them how it's done. Behind him, Walsh stood with a smug grin. Alyssa approached the firing line, settled the rifle against her shoulder and began her demonstration. Her movements were measured and exact, each explanation clear, each action deliberate. The fundamentals don't change, she said to the recruits. Bone support, breath control, natural point of aim. She fired 5 shots in quick succession. When the target was retrieved, the grouping was so tight it could be covered with a single coin. Even the recruits were silent. Acceptable, Blackwood said at last, though his voice betrayed a hint of surprise. Lucky conditions, Walsh muttered. No wind. He motioned for a range assistant. Let's fix that. 3 portable fans were positioned at different distances, creating an artificial wind pattern, chaotic, unpredictable. 5 more rounds, Walsh said coldly. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Alyssa adjusted her stance, observed the dust movement between the fans, and fired again. When the target returned, the holes were even tighter. Now the silence was heavier. Walsh's jaw tightened. He wasn't done. One final test, he said, blindfolded. A murmur ran through the group. Blindfolded shooting wasn't standard. It was humiliation disguised as challenge. Alyssa accepted the cloth without hesitation, tied it around her eyes, and established her position by memory. 3 rounds, Blackwood ordered. Begin. She fired once, twice, 3 times. When the blindfold came off, the target showed 3 holes clustered within the center mass. Qualifying score, no fluke. Blackwood said nothing for a long time, then quietly, class dismissed. As the cadets dispersed, Walsh's expression darkened. His jaw clenched, but he forced a thin smile. Don't get comfortable, Trent. One trick doesn't make you a marksman. No, Staff Sergeant, she said. Consistency does. It was the first time anyone had seen Walsh speechless. That afternoon, word spread like wildfire. The cadet who wasn't supposed to shoot had outperformed the instructors. By evening, half the base had heard. Some called it luck, others called it skill. Walsh called it a problem. When Alyssa returned to her quarters, she found Lieutenant Rodriguez waiting at her door. He closed it behind them before speaking. Word spreading, he said quietly, and not just about your demonstration. Someone hit the 4,550-meter target this morning. Alyssa said nothing. Walsh thinks it was you. Can he prove it? No, Rodriguez replied, but he doesn't need to. Suspicion is enough. She met his gaze. What do you suggest? He hesitated, then handed her a folded paper. "You're on the roster for tomorrow's competition. My selection." She unfolded it, official documentation. Her name printed cleanly among the elite. Walsh's name was there too. "You're serious?" "I'm dead serious," Rodriguez said. "This isn't just about a contest anymore. It's about proving what skill really means." Peterson appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "You've already done the impossible once. Time to do it again, officially." As the two men left, Alyssa sat down on her bunk, staring at the paper in her hand. Outside, the wind had picked up restless, whispering against the walls. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver dollar her father had given her. Its surface was worn smooth from years of his deployments. She ran her thumb over it slowly. She remembered the last thing he'd told her before she left home. "They'll test you, Alicat, not your aim, your patience, your silence. They'll mistake both for weakness until it's too late." Her throat tightened, but her voice when it came was steady. "I won't let them, Dad." She placed the coin on the nightstand beside her notebook, open to a single line she'd written the night before. "The bullet only knows physics, but people need proof." She turned off the light, the range still echoing in her memory. The wind, the silence, the impossible shot she'd already made. Tomorrow, the world would know what she'd known all along. That the impossible was never about distance. It was about belief. Why did they make her shoot with frozen hands? The morning of the competition arrived like a storm pretending to be calm. The sun was bright, the air still, the sky too blue, the kind of perfect morning that always meant something ugly was about to happen. Silver Creek buzzed with unusual energy. Trucks rolled in from the upper base. Tripods, telemetry gear, and high-speed cameras were being set up across the range. It wasn't a training day anymore. It was a proving day. Alyssa stood at the edge of the platform, expression neutral, eyes steady. Around her, the other shooters were already posturing, stretching, joking, testing triggers. But this wasn't just another exercise. This was the test. The long-range evaluation. The kind that made or ended reputations. Walsh had organized the whole thing himself. He'd written the drills, chosen the terrain, set the rules. And everyone knew, though no one said it, that his real target wasn't the steel at 4,550 meters. It was her. "Morning, Princess," Walsh called as he passed her station. "Hope you brought gloves, you'll need them." Alyssa didn't respond. She simply adjusted the bipod of her rifle, her movements calm, efficient. Behind her, Rodriguez approached with a clipboard. "Officially," he said quietly, "this is a marksmanship endurance test, but unofficially." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She looked up. "He's trying to break me." Rodriguez gave a short nod. "He's going to try." Across the range, Walsh barked orders. "All right, ladies and gentlemen, here how this works. You'll shoot from 3 positions. Standard prone, kneeling," and his voice curved into something cruel, "ice test." A ripple of confusion moved through the cadets. "The what?" one of them muttered. Walsh grinned. "Ice test means your hands go numb. You submerge them in ice water for 60 seconds before you shoot, because in the field you don't get to pick the weather." Rodriguez's jaw clenched. "That's not regulation." Walsh shrugged. "Then it's motivation." Alyssa's expression didn't change. She'd trained through pain before. But this wasn't about her endurance. It was about humiliation. "Trent," Walsh barked, "you're up first for the ice test." The others looked away, uneasy. No one wanted to make eye contact. She stepped forward. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Hands," he ordered, gesturing to the steel drum filled with water and ice chunks glistening under the sun. She plunged her hands in without a word. The pain hit instantly, sharp, electric, unbearable. Her breath caught, but she forced herself to stay still. "Timer starts now," Walsh said. The cold crawled up her arms like a living thing. Her fingertips went numb, then dead. She focused on breathing slow, even detached. Somewhere behind her, someone muttered, "That's brutal." Rodriguez folded his arms. "That's deliberate." Walsh just smirked. "It's real." After 60 seconds, he barked, "Time, hands out, get to the line." Alyssa's hands trembled as she wiped them on her fatigues. She flexed her fingers once, no feeling. It didn't matter. She approached the rifle, set her cheek to the stock, and inhaled. The weapon felt distant, disconnected from her body, like she was operating through a fog. "Target 1,200 meters, Peterson called. "Standard evaluation." "Send it," Walsh ordered. She fired. Crack! The bullet hit just shy of center. A near-perfect shot under normal conditions, a miracle under these. "Next," Walsh said, his voice flat. She cycled the bolt with stiff fingers. The brass casing clinked softly beside her. Another shot. "Impact center." Rodriguez looked through the spotter scope, disbelief flickering across his face. "She's compensating mid-breath." Walsh didn't answer. His jaw tightened. "Third shot," Peterson said. Alyssa fired again. This time the hit rang true, a perfect center strike. Silence fell. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Walsh said quietly, "Next stage." They moved to the prone position at extreme distance, 2,800 meters. The air was beginning to shimmer with heat. Mirage waves danced across the valley. Alyssa steadied her breathing, flexing her fingers until sensation began to return. The first shot drifted slightly right, the second corrected it, the third a perfect impact. "Trent's confirmed on all three," Peterson announced almost proudly. But Walsh wasn't done. He wasn't satisfied. He gestured toward the far ridge. "Final target 4,550 meters. Only one shooter's ever come close." His eyes cut toward her. "And I doubt lightning strikes twice." Rodriguez stepped forward. That range was not part of the scheduled. "Permission granted," Walsh interrupted coldly. "She wants to prove herself. Let her." Blackwood, observing from the tower above, said nothing. He just folded his hands behind his back. Alyssa said softly, "Permission to proceed, sir." Blackwood nodded. "Proceed." The sun was merciless now. Heat waves distorted everything. The wind carried unpredictable gusts, switching direction every few seconds. Alyssa closed her eyes for a moment, tuning everything else out. Her father's voice came back to her, calm, steady, unbreakable. "Don't fight the environment, Alicat. Listen to it. It'll tell you what it's doing if you stop trying to control it." She exhaled, opened her eyes. Through the scope the world became simple. Data, distance, rhythm. "Range 4550, Peterson confirmed. "Send it when ready," Blackwood ordered. Alyssa made her adjustments, windage, elevation, temperature drift. Her movements were deliberate, graceful, almost meditative. Then she paused, finger resting gently on the trigger. Walsh stood behind her, smirking. "What's the matter, cadet? Too far for fairy tales?" Her voice was quiet. "No, Staff Sergeant, just calculating the margin of error in your expectations." The laughter that followed was uneasy, the kind that masks fear. She inhaled once, then fired. The rifle kicked back, echoing across the valley. Rodriguez watched through the spotting scope, his pulse hammering. 10 seconds of silence followed. Then, "Impact," Peterson breathed. Upper torso, dead hit. A single metallic clang rolled through the valley. The entire range went silent. Even Walsh's smirk faltered. She chambered another round. "Second confirmation, sir." Blackwood's voice was calm, controlled. "Proceed." She adjusted for crosswind, then fired again. "Impact," Peterson confirmed, louder this time. "Center mass. Confirmed double hit at 4550. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was awe. Alyssa slowly lifted her head from the rifle, eyes steady, expression unreadable. Walsh's face was stone. She stood, saluted. "Permission to clear the range, sir." Blackwood's voice was softer now. "Granted." As she walked back from the platform, every pair of eyes followed her. Not a single word was spoken. Even the wind seemed to move differently, slower, respectful. Later that evening, the mess hall was alive with whispers. No one knew what to say. A cadet had done the impossible. Peterson found her sitting alone near the edge of the compound, cleaning the TAC rifle under the fading light. "Walsh isn't taking this well," he said. "I didn't expect him to," Alyssa replied, not looking up. "He filed a report, claims you cheated, says you had assistants calibrating." "Did he name who?" "No," Peterson said, "because he can't prove it." Alyssa's hands kept working, movements calm and precise. "Then he'll have to live with doubt." Peterson studied her. "You don't talk much, do you?" "No, Master Sergeant." "Good," he said after a pause. "Talking ruins focus." He started to leave, then stopped. "That shot today, it wasn't just good, it was perfect, but perfection's dangerous. It makes enemies." When he was gone, Alyssa set the rifle down and stared at her reflection in the scope. It wasn't pride she saw. It wasn't satisfaction. It was the faint, unshakable realization that she'd crossed an invisible line, the kind you can't come back from. At 2200 hours, she was summoned to Blackwood's office. He didn't speak at first. He just gestured toward a folder on his desk. Inside were photographs, her shots from that morning, captured frame by the range cameras. "2 confirmed hits," he said quietly. "Official distance 4,550 meters, record standing." She didn't respond. He closed the folder. "Staff Sergeant Walsh has requested a formal review. I denied it." Her head lifted slightly. "May I ask why, sir?" "Because there's nothing to review," he said simply. "You earned it." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You remind me of someone." "My father, sir." Blackwood smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe of someone who still believes discipline means something." She nodded once. "Thank you, sir." As she turned to leave, he said softly, "Cadet Trent, whatever happens next, remember dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't need to." She paused at the door. "Yes, sir." Outside, the desert night was cold again. Stars shimmered like distant tracer fire. She walked to the range, where the steel target still stood faintly visible in the moonlight, 2 perfect impact marks gleaming like eyes staring back at her. She stood there for a long time, her breath forming small clouds in the dark. No one would ever really understand what that shot meant. Not just to her, but to everyone who'd ever been told to stay quiet, stay small, stay still. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her father's silver dollar, and turned it in her hand. Sometimes victory isn't loud, she thought. It's just quiet enough for the truth to breathe. The wind swept through the range, soft, respectful like a bow. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Silver Creek, Alyssa allowed herself a small, private smile. Because she knew this wasn't the end of her test. It was only the beginning. Why do victories always make enemies? The morning after her record shot, Silver Creek looked the same dust, same wind, same distant mountains, but nothing felt the same. Everywhere Alyssa went, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every look lingered a moment too long. Every smile carried a question behind it. She wasn't invisible anymore. And visibility, in a place built on rank and ego, was dangerous. At breakfast, the chatter rolled through the mess hall in half-whispered fragments. "Did you see the footage?" "No way, that was luck." She must have had wind data piped in somehow. "Rodriguez helped her, I bet." Alyssa ate in silence, spoon moving mechanically. She didn't look up once. Across the room, Walsh sat with his usual crew, voice pitched just loud enough for her to hear. She got lucky, boys. One good pull doesn't make her a sniper. You all know what happens to one-hit wonders. The laughter that followed was forced, too sharp, too loud. Even they could feel the ground shifting under them. When Alyssa rose to leave, Rodriguez intercepted her near the door. "Command wants you in debrief at 0900, he said. She nodded. "Is it about the record?" "About the reaction to it." His tone was guarded. "Be careful what you say." She met his eyes. "I always am." The debrief room was small, air-conditioned, clinical. Major Blackwood sat at the head of the table, file folders stacked like bricks beside him. Walsh stood against the wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Peterson and Rodriguez flanked Alyssa on either side, silent witnesses, maybe protection. "Cadet Trent," Blackwood began, "your performance yesterday was exceptional. 2 confirmed impacts at a range previously considered beyond the limits of human precision." "Yes, sir." He slid a report across the table. "However, such performance raises questions. Staff Sergeant Walsh has submitted a formal inquiry into procedural integrity." Walsh's voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "I'm not accusing, sir. I'm verifying for the integrity of the program." Blackwood's eyes didn't leave Alyssa. "Did you have access to unauthorized telemetry or laser range-finding data?" "No, sir." "Did any instructor assist you in calculating firing solutions?" "No, sir." Walsh interjected. "She kept a notebook full of equations. Maybe she—" Blackwood raised a hand. "I'm aware of the notebook." He turned back to her. "Cadet, explain in your own words how you made the shot." Alyssa's answer came steady, quiet. "I studied atmospheric layers, sir. Temperature drift, barometric variance, mirage pattern. I accounted for the Coriolis effect based on azimuth alignment. I waited for wind convergence before release." Blackwood considered that. "You waited for the wind to agree with you?" "Yes, sir." Walsh snorted softly. "Or for the cameras to glitch." Blackwood's gaze cut toward him, sharp, warning. "That will be enough, Staff Sergeant." For a long moment, only the hum of the air conditioning filled the room. Finally Blackwood spoke. "Inquiry closed. Record stands." He gathered the files, his voice dropping lower. "You did something extraordinary, Cadet, but extraordinary draws fire. Keep your head down for a while." "Yes, sir." As she stood to leave, Walsh's voice followed her, low, venomous. "Keep your head down too long. You stop seeing who's aiming at you." By afternoon, her isolation was complete. No one volunteered to train beside her. No one sat near her in class. Even Thompson, the one who'd shown respect before, now kept his distance, guilt or fear. She couldn't tell. Her gear went missing twice. Her scope was found fogged with solvent. Petty sabotage, small enough to deny, big enough to sting. Each time she said nothing. She simply fixed the damage and kept moving. Rodriguez noticed first. "You're being iced out," he said quietly one evening as she checked equipment alone. "I've been iced out before. This isn't like before." She glanced up, "Then it's practice for later." He studied her for a long moment. "You ever let anyone help you, Trent?" "Only when it helps the mission." "And what's the mission now?" She didn't answer. 2 days later, during night drills, Walsh found another opening. He called it a stress evaluation. Everyone else called it what it was: punishment dressed in protocol. "Range 0 visibility," he announced. "Targets at unknown distances. Cadet Trent will demonstrate first." Rain hammered the valley, cold and relentless. Visibility, 20 meters, the kind of conditions that made even seasoned shooters miss easy shots. Alyssa stood under the makeshift canopy, rain dripping from her cap. Walsh handed her a rifle, not her TAC. A standard-issue M24, unfamiliar balance, misaligned optics. "Can't risk giving you your favorite toy," he said, smiling thinly. She checked the weapon anyway, adjusting by feel. Rodriguez stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant, that rifle hasn't been calibrated." Walsh cut him off. "Then she'll adapt. Isn't that what Marines do?" The test began. Lightning flashed across the ridge, illuminating the field for a heartbeat, just enough to reveal the targets, black silhouettes in the storm. Alyssa fired once, misadjusted, fired again. Impact center. She moved to the next position, missed, corrected, hit. Rain ran down her face like tears she refused to shed. When the final shot echoed, Peterson's voice came over the radio. 3 of 5 confirmed. Under these conditions, that's outstanding. Walsh said nothing. He just turned and walked away, coat whipping in the wind. Rodriguez approached her after the range cleared. "You keep this up, they'll have to promote you just to explain you." She gave a tired smile. "Or bury me in paperwork until I quit." He laughed softly. "Don't give them that satisfaction." That night she found her bunk stripped bare, sheets gone, locker emptied. A single note taped to the frame: "Physics can't save you now." She folded the paper once and tucked it into her notebook. No anger, no fear. Only confirmation. She was inside the storm now. At 200, footsteps echoed outside her barracks. She heard the latch rattle, then silence. She sat up, heart steady, waited. Nothing. Whoever it was, they wanted her to know they'd been there. By dawn, she was already on the range again, alone, practicing with the old M24. Every shot, every click, every correction, ritual against chaos. Peterson found her there just after sunrise. "You ever sleep?" "Sometimes," she said, adjusting her scope. He watched her a long moment. "You remind me of someone, my daughter. She used to believe work could fix anything." "Couldn't it?" He shook his head. "Not everything's mechanical, kid. Some things you fix by outlasting them." The command review came a week later. Formal, sterile, suffocating. Blackwood sat at the far end again. Walsh presented his concerns. Alyssa was accused of potential integrity breaches. No evidence, just insinuation. Rodriguez defended her calmly. Peterson confirmed her logs. The panel found nothing. Still, the tone had changed. She could feel it. Every answer she gave was weighed, dissected, doubted. When it ended, Blackwood dismissed the room but asked her to stay. He waited until the door closed. "You know what this is really about, don't you?" "Yes, sir." "It isn't the shot." "No, sir, it's who made it." He sighed, leaning back. "The core changes slowly, sometimes too slowly. You're paying the price for that." She met his eyes. "Then it's a price worth paying." Blackwood smiled faintly, spoken like a Marine. He paused, voice softening. "Your father would have been proud." She swallowed hard. "You knew him?" He nodded. "A long time ago. Iraq, 2003. Best ballistic mind I ever met. Saved lives with math. Died making sure others lived." Her throat tightened. "He never told me much about those years." He wouldn't have. Men like him carry silence as armor. He stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Looks like you inherited that." After the review, Walsh's behavior shifted from open hostility to cold precision. He stopped insulting her, stopped acknowledging her at all. The silence was worse than the shouting. It meant he was planning something. Rodriguez warned her. "He's filing new evaluations, trying to have you transferred out." "On what grounds?" "Personality incompatibility. Failure to integrate with team dynamics. It's bureaucratic code for she doesn't obey the unwritten rules." Alyssa exhaled slowly. "Then I'll keep doing what I came here to do, learn." Rodriguez smiled faintly. You know that stubborn calm of yours, it's infuriating. She met his gaze. It's survival. The next field exercise came suddenly. Desert navigation and endurance. 3 days, limited rations, high heat. Teams of 4. Alyssa was assigned alone. When she checked the roster, Walsh's signature was at the bottom. Rodriguez protested. Solo deployment violates. Blackwood interrupted. I approved it. She's the only one who scored perfect on solo operations. Rodriguez shot Alyssa a look. Be careful out there. She nodded once, always. The desert was merciless. Daylight burned, nights froze. By the second day, her canteen was half empty, her uniform stiff with salt and dust. But she moved with purpose, reading terrain, mapping shadows, trusting instinct. She'd grown up in environments that tested patience more than strength. This was no different. At sunset, she reached the waypoint, a rusted comm tower surrounded by silence. She set up camp, radioed her coordinates, and waited for acknowledgement. None came. Static, only static. Hours passed. The wind howled across the dunes. Then headlights appeared on the horizon, one vehicle, unmarked, moving slow. She reached for her rifle, kept low. When the truck stopped 100 yards away, a voice called through a megaphone. Cadet Trent, this is range control, exercise over. She hesitated. Something in the tone wasn't right, too eager, too rehearsed. Approach slowly, the voice said. She didn't move. Her radio crackled suddenly. Rodriguez's voice faint through static. Trent, don't, that's. Then silence. Her heartbeat steadied. She exhaled once, quietly chambered around and waited. The truck's engine idled, then reversed. Turned, drove away into the dark. Only when it vanished completely did she allow herself to breathe again. By dawn, retrieval teams arrived, real ones this time. Rodriguez jumped from the lead vehicle, face pale. Someone spoofed the comms. You could have been abducted or worse. By who? We don't know, but whoever it was, they had base-grade encryption keys. Walsh approached from behind. She's fine, Lieutenant, don't dramatize it. Rodriguez spun on him. You knew, didn't you? Walsh's smile was thin. If I did, she just passed another test, didn't she? Alyssa stood between them, silent, watching, listening. The real battle, she realized, wasn't fought on ranges or in deserts. It was fought in shadows, in the space between truth and manipulation. And she was done being the quiet target. That night back at Silver Creek, she opened her notebook again. The pages were filled with numbers, sketches, firing arcs. But at the bottom of the newest page, she wrote something different, not math, not calculation. A weapon isn't dangerous because it's powerful. It's dangerous because someone decides when to pull the trigger. She closed the notebook gently. Outside, the desert wind whispered against the window, patient, relentless, eternal. Her father's words echoed once more. The bullet only knows physics, Alicat, but people, they aim with emotion. She looked toward the distant range, faint under the moonlight. Tomorrow, she decided, she would stop reacting and start deciding. Because silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. And her next move would not be measured in meters. It would be measured in resolve. What happens when silence finally decides to speak? The desert was colder than usual that morning, a kind of cold that didn't belong to dawn but to change. Alyssa could feel it in the air, in the way people avoided her eyes, in the stillness that followed her down the corridor. Something had shifted at Silver Creek, something unseen. Rumors had spread faster than orders. That she'd defied command. That she'd compromised security. That she'd been involved in a breach no one could prove but everyone wanted to believe. She'd spent her life learning to ignore noise, but this was different. This noise had weight. It was designed to isolate her completely. Walsh was behind it, she knew. Not from evidence, but from the pattern, the method, the precision. He wasn't just trying to destroy her career. He wanted to erase her dignity along with it. But the thing about erasing someone is, you have to believe they'll stay quiet while you do it. At 600, she was called to the main office for administrative review. The tone of the summons was polite. The silence that followed it was. Inside, Major Blackwood sat behind his desk, looking older than usual. The file in front of him was thick, too thick for anything simple. Rodriguez stood near the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't look at her when she entered. "Cadet Trent," Blackwood began, his voice even but heavy, "do you understand why you're here?" "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "Someone filed new allegations." "Correct." He opened the file. "Unauthorized access to base frequencies. Potential security breach during field exercise." "I didn't access anything unauthorized, sir." "Do you deny being alone near the comm tower?" "I was following procedure, reporting coordinates when the signal failed." Blackwood closed the file. "The report claims you transmitted on an encrypted channel reserved for Operations Command." "That's impossible. I don't have clearance." "Yet someone used your call sign," he said softly. The silence that followed was worse than accusation. It was disbelief pretending to be fairness. Rodriguez finally spoke. "Sir, this is a setup. We both know who'd benefit from." "Lieutenant," Blackwood interrupted, his tone sharp. "That's enough." Rodriguez fell silent. Alyssa stood straighter. "Sir, I'll cooperate fully. I've got nothing to hide." Blackwood nodded once. "I know." He sighed, leaning back. "But others won't see it that way." She understood what he wasn't saying. The Corps had a way of protecting its own, and Walsh was one of its own. "Effective immediately," Blackwood continued. "You're suspended from live-fire operations until this inquiry is resolved." The words hit like a clean shot. No drama, no echo, just finality. Alyssa's voice didn't waver. "Understood, sir." "Return to quarters. You'll be contacted by internal review." She saluted, turned and left, slow, controlled, precise. But inside something cracked. For the first time in months she felt anger, not the kind that explodes, the kind that freezes cold, calculated, absolute. By evening, her bunk was empty again. Her nameplate had been removed. Someone had etched the word "cheat" into the locker door with a knife. She stared at it for a long time, not with pain but with clarity. If this was the cost of being right, she'd pay it in silence. But she wouldn't forget. She opened her notebook. The equations, the wind maps, the trajectory sketches, all still there. Then on a blank page, she began writing something new. Not numbers, words. They think proof is something written on paper, but proof lives in what a person refuses to surrender. Her pen stopped. She underlined the last word. Surrender. She closed the notebook, stood, and walked to the communications shed, the same one Walsh always locked after hours. It was dark, quiet, empty. She entered carefully, listening. The hum of equipment filled the small room. On the desk, a logbook lay open, standard transmissions, timestamps, signatures. Except one. Her call sign. Wrong time, wrong frequency. Stamped with Walsh's initials. She took a photo with her service camera, silent, methodical. Then she closed the logbook exactly as she'd found it. When she turned, Rodriguez was standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Neither should those forged entries," she replied. He stepped closer. "If you're caught, then they'll finally have something real to charge me with." Rodriguez shook his head. "You're playing with fire, Trent." She looked at him, calm. "Then it's time someone stopped pretending this place isn't burning." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll help you." That night the two of them combed through training archives, weapon records, maintenance logs, communication keys. Every entry Walsh had signed was precise, too precise, the kind of perfection that only liars maintain. At 300, Rodriguez found it, a duplicate access key for the encrypted channel Walsh claimed she'd used, logged out of sequence. "Got you," he murmured. Alyssa leaned closer. "Can it be traced?" He smiled faintly. "If we're careful." They copied the file onto a secure drive. Then Rodriguez paused, frowning. "There's something else, a transmission from 3 nights ago, unlogged." He played the file. A distorted voice came through static. "Silver Creek test phase complete. Transfer protocol active." Alyssa's stomach tightened. "That's not training data." "No," Rodriguez said slowly. "That's Black Project phrasing, classified, and Walsh was the last one to access the system." She stared at the screen. "He's covering something bigger." Rodriguez nodded. "And you got caught standing in front of it." The next morning, Blackwood called for a closed session. Rodriguez presented the data, the transmission logs, the forged entries. Walsh sat silent, his face unreadable. When the playback ended, the room felt colder. Blackwood's voice was calm. "Staff Sergeant, care to explain why your credentials accessed restricted frequencies outside mission hours?" Walsh's answer came smooth, rehearsed. "With respect, sir, I run post-maintenance diagnostics. That's standard." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Diagnostics don't use encrypted operational channels." Walsh smirked. "Then maybe the system mislogged it, or maybe your cadet doctored evidence." Blackwood's gaze shifted between them, the old soldier weighing two truths, both heavy. Alyssa broke the silence. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Granted." Staff Sergeant Walsh forged my call sign to hide his transmissions. He compromised base integrity to protect whatever operation he's running. And when I hit that shot, I became a liability. He needed to discredit me. Walsh laughed softly. "You've got quite the imagination, cadet." She met his eyes. Not imagination, pattern recognition. The room went still. Even the hum of the projector seemed to fade. Blackwood finally spoke. "Until I verify these records, both of you are confined to base. No field work, no comms access." Walsh stood abruptly. "Sir." "That's an order," Blackwood snapped. Alyssa didn't move. She didn't need to. For the first time, Walsh looked uncertain. Hours later, Rodriguez found her at the observation deck overlooking the range. The sun was setting, turning the sand red gold. "You realize," he said, "even if he's caught, they'll bury this." "I know. So why risk it?" She looked out toward the horizon, where the steel target still stood faintly visible in the dying light. "Because someone has to tell the truth, even if no one listens." Rodriguez smiled sadly. "Your father said the same thing once." She turned. "You knew him better than you let on." He nodded. "We served under Blackwood. Your father taught me that sometimes silence saves more lives than orders." Alyssa smiled faintly. "He was right, until silence becomes a weapon too." They stood in quiet for a while, the wind carrying the faint clang of metal from the range. That night, Walsh made his move. Security alarms blared across the compound. Rodriguez woke to pounding on his door, 2 MPs, armed, expressionless. "Lieutenant, you're under investigation for tampering with command files." He didn't resist. "Of course I am," he muttered. They took him away before sunrise. Alyssa knew exactly who'd authorized it. And she knew what it meant. Walsh wasn't defending himself anymore. He was cleaning house. By noon, her quarters had been searched. Her notebook was gone. Only the silver dollar remained on the table. She picked it up, ran her thumb over the worn surface, and whispered, "You told me this would happen, didn't you, Dad?" Then she smiled, small, tired but certain. Because she'd prepared for this. In the one place Walsh would never think to look, the old range shed. She'd hidden copies of every file, every log, every timestamp. And tonight she would make sure they reached the right hands. When darkness fell, she moved silently through the compound, dressed in fatigues without insignia. The wind howled through the valley, covering her footsteps. At the comm tower, she connected the secure drive to the external relay, bypassed the lockout, and sent the files to the only person she trusted, Major Blackwood. Transmission complete. Verification green. She exhaled slowly, done. A voice behind her froze her in place. Should have known you'd try something like this. Walsh stepped from the shadows, pistol low at his side. She didn't turn. If you're going to shoot me, do it, but I backed up the files twice. He laughed softly. You think anyone going to believe a cadet over a decorated Marine? She faced him now, calm, steady. They won't have to believe me. They'll see the transmission records. Walsh's smile faltered. You have no idea what you're part of. Then enlighten me. He hesitated. For a flicker of a moment, something almost human crossed his face, regret maybe. Then it vanished. You're just like your father, he said, always digging where you shouldn't. Her breath caught. You knew him. Knew him? Walsh stepped closer. I served under him. He ruined an operation that could have ended the war early. His math got men killed. That's not true. He believed in equations more than people, just like you. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the wind howled through the antenna above. Then Alyssa said quietly, maybe that's why we hit what we aim at. Walsh's jaw clenched. You should have stayed quiet. He raised the pistol. Before he could fire, headlights cut through the dark base patrol. Walsh froze. Alyssa stepped back into the light, hands visible. Go ahead, she said softly. Pull the trigger. Show them what silence really looks like. He didn't move, couldn't. The MPs shouted orders. He dropped the gun. Hours later, Blackwood reviewed the files she'd sent. Every log, every falsified transmission, every cover-up. When the door opened, Alyssa stood there calm, collected. Is it enough? She asked. He nodded slowly. It's more than enough. Rodriguez, newly released, stood beside him. Walsh would face a tribunal. The operation, whatever it had been, was over. You understand, Blackwood said, this won't make you popular. I didn't come here for popularity, sir. He smiled faintly. No, you came to prove something. She shook her head. No, sir, I came to stop proving it. That night she walked alone to the range one last time. The stars burned bright above, and the steel target stood in silence, witness to everything. She knelt, placed the silver dollar at the base of the rifle stand, and whispered, You were right, Dad. The bullet only knows physics, but truth, it knows timing. She stood, turned toward the desert horizon, and smiled. Because sometimes, the most powerful shot isn't the one that hits. It's the one that exposes. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What do you do when the truth finally costs you everything? The desert was quiet again. Too quiet. Silver Creek's firing range sat empty, a strip of dust, wind, and memory. Walsh was gone. Transferred pending tribunal. Officially, removed for administrative reassignment. Unofficially, no one said a word. Alyssa had expected relief. Instead, she felt the hollow ache that comes after a storm, the silence that doesn't heal but lingers. The system had worked, at least on paper. But in places like this, justice came with fine print. And she was the footnote. 3 days after Walsh's removal, she was summoned to headquarters again. Same hallway, same air-conditioned chill. Different kind of quiet. Major Blackwood sat behind his desk, Rodriguez standing off to the side, arms folded. No files this time, just an envelope sealed and plain. Cadet Trent, Blackwood began, his voice measured. Headquarters has concluded its investigation. Your record is clear, no charges. A pause. But, she asked softly. Blackwood's eyes met hers. Command feels that, given the publicity of this incident, it would be best to reassign you, temporarily. Alyssa blinked once. Reassign or remove? He hesitated. Both, depending on how you look at it. She let the words settle. They sounded polite, final. Her heart was steady, but her voice carried an edge of exhaustion. I did what was right. I know, Blackwood said quietly. That's the problem. She almost smiled, not from humor, but from recognition. Truth had a cost, and she just received the bill. Where am I going? Langley, Civilian Liaison Program, Analytical Division, quiet work, clean. So that was the reward, exile with paperwork. She nodded once. When do I leave? Tomorrow at dawn. Rodriguez stepped forward. You don't have to take this. You can appeal. To who? She asked. The same system that wanted me silent. He had no answer. Blackwood stood, extending a hand. You made the impossible shot, Trent, twice. But this was the one that mattered. You hit something you couldn't see. She shook his hand. With respect, sir, I wasn't aiming to hit, just to stop missing. Blackwood smiled faintly, pride flickering in his eyes. Semper Fi, cadet. Always faithful, she replied, even when it hurts. That night she walked through Silver Creek one last time. The barracks, the training yard, the empty range. She'd spent months here being underestimated, tested, silenced, and finally heard. But now, standing at the edge of the desert, she realized something profound. She hadn't come here to prove herself. She'd come here to remember who she was. The memory came back uninvited, a younger version of her, standing beside her father in a field of Texas grass, the smell of oil and dust in the air. His voice had been calm, steady, even then. You can't control the wind, Alicat, but you can learn to read it. She smiled. I finally get it, Dad. Because all this time, she hadn't been fighting the wind. She'd been learning from it. At dawn, a transport truck waited by the gate. Rodriguez stood nearby, holding her duffel. Langley's not bad, he said. You'll have coffee, computers, real sleep. She chuckled softly. Sounds like retirement. You deserve it. She took the bag, slinging it over her shoulder. Deserves got nothing to do with it. He hesitated, then handed her something small, a folded photograph. It was her father in uniform, standing beside Blackwood. The caption on the back read, Fallujah 2003. She stared at it for a long moment. Where did you get this? Your father gave it to me before his last deployment. Said if I ever met his daughter, I'd know by the eyes. Her throat tightened. He always believed math could save lives. Rodriguez smiled. Looks like he was right. When she turned to leave, he said softly, Trent, don't stop aiming. She looked back. I never do. Langley was another world, sterile, fluorescent, predictable. She traded rifle oil for printer toner, desert air for recycled oxygen. Her new assignment was ballistics data analysis and simulation review. In simple terms, studying numbers that predicted how bullets behaved. No dust, no danger, no horizon. But every evening, when the lab emptied and the lights dimmed, she stayed. She'd load the simulation, input real wind data, and replay her Silver Creek shot over and over, adjusting nothing. Every time, the model said the same thing. The hit probability at 4,550 meters was 0.000014%. Impossible. And yet she'd done it twice. She stopped believing in odds the day she'd learned to trust physics over people. But one night, as the simulation played again, a message popped up on her secure terminal, no sender ID, just a timestamp. You weren't the only one he was transmitting to. Her pulse quickened. She opened the file. Coordinates. A transmission log. A name. Operation Meridian. The encrypted packet matched Walsh's signature. And someone was still using it 3 weeks after his removal. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. She could report it. She could ignore it. Or she could follow it. For a long time, she just stared at the blinking cursor, the digital heartbeat of another decision she didn't ask for but couldn't avoid. Finally, she whispered, "All right, let's see what you left behind." Over the next week, she dug quietly. Buried in old transfer manifests, she found hints, supply reroutes, unlogged weapon shipments, ghost training units tied to Silver Creek's funding. The further she searched, the clearer it became. Walsh hadn't been the architect. He'd been the shield. Someone higher had been pulling the strings. At night, she'd sit by the lab window, watching the wind move through the trees outside, thinking of the desert of noise, of silence, of truth. And one night she made a decision. Not out of vengeance, not out of pride, but out of duty. If she'd learned anything at Silver Creek, it was this. Sometimes orders end, but responsibility doesn't. She compiled the data, encrypted it, and sent it to one person, Major Blackwood. No message, no explanation, just coordinates and truth. 2 days later, her secure line rang. "Trent," Blackwood's voice came through, calm as always. "You've been busy." "I don't like unfinished equations, sir." "You realize what this means?" "Yes, sir. It means Walsh wasn't working alone." A long pause. "Then you want back in." She hesitated. Back in what? "The field." She glanced at the photo of her father pinned above her desk. For months, she'd convinced herself she was done with missions, done with bullets. But something deeper stirred, not adrenaline, not anger. "Purpose?" "When?" she asked. 48 hours off the record, observation only. "Observation," she repeated. He chuckled softly. "That's what you said before you hit 4,550 meters. 48 hours later, she was back in desert air, a different range, a different sky, but the same silence. Blackwood stood beside her, binoculars in hand. "Target not human this time," he said. "Paper trail, logistics chain. Someone funneled classified gear to a private defense contractor. Guess where it originated?" "Silver Creek." He nodded. "Right under our noses." They moved through the compound, quiet, efficient, professional. For every locked door, there was another layer of truth. For every answer, another ghost. And by the end of the day, the pieces fit almost. But not enough for a full picture. Until Rodriguez arrived. Older, rougher, but the same eyes. "Didn't think you'd stay away forever," he said. "Neither did I." They spent the next 12 hours pulling data, tracing lines, connecting dots. And by dawn, the story was complete. Walsh had been protecting an off-book weapons program, using Silver Creek's training budget to launder prototype shipments. And someone higher in command had authorized it. Alyssa stared at the files, her reflection glowing faintly in the laptop screen. "It never ends, does it?" Blackwood shook his head. "Not for people like us." "Then what now?" He looked out toward the horizon. "Now you aim again, only this time your target isn't metal." They returned to D.C. with evidence enough to spark inquiries, hearings, resignations. Her name appeared nowhere in the reports. And she wanted it that way. Because she'd learned something through all of it, something her father had never put into words but had always known. That silence, when chosen, isn't weakness. It's strength refined. She sat alone in her apartment that night, the city lights flickering like tracer rounds in the fog. On the table lay her father's silver dollar. She turned it once, catching its worn gleam. She whispered, "You were right again, Dad." And then softer, "Sometimes dignity isn't in the noise you make. It's in the noise you refuse to answer." The next morning, she walked out of the building with her duffel, same way she'd left Silver Creek. Different uniform, same eyes. A reporter called after her, "Miss Trent, is it true you exposed corruption inside the Corps?" She didn't stop walking, didn't slow down, didn't answer, because she knew something the world didn't. Heroes don't announce themselves. They just keep walking toward whatever horizon needs them next. Far away, in the desert she once called hell, the wind still carried the sound of a single metallic clang. A bullet hitting steel at 4,550 meters. A sound that would outlast names, ranks, and rumors. It wasn't about records anymore. It never had been. It was about precision, conviction, and the courage to hold still while the world shook around you. How do you measure distance once you've already hit the impossible? Years had passed. The wind still sounded the same. Alyssa Trent parked her Jeep at the edge of the training valley, once called Silver Creek. The base had changed, new fences, new buildings, but the ridgeline hadn't. It still held the same indifferent grace, carved by time and memory. She stepped out slowly, the desert heat pressing against her skin. Dust rose around her boots, curling like ghosts of everything she'd survived. There was no ceremony waiting for her. No banners. Just silence. The kind she'd learned to trust. Inside the small range museum, built long after she'd left, there was a single plaque behind glass. Unidentified CADRET, record impact distance, 4,550 meters. Location, Silver Creek Training Facility. Date classified. She stared at it for a long time. No name, no story. Just numbers. Exactly how she'd wanted it. Because the world didn't need to know who she was. Only that it was possible. Outside, the horizon shimmered. Rodriguez waited by the Jeep, older now, hair streaked with gray. He handed her a small thermos. "Coffee's terrible," he said, "just like old times." She smiled. Some things don't improve with rank. They sat on the tailgate, facing the valley that had made and broken them both. "Blackwood retired last month," Rodriguez said. "Sent me a note, said to tell you he still keeps your file in his drawer." She took a slow sip, the coffee bitter and grounding. "Good man," she said softly. He understood silence better than most. Rodriguez nodded. "You ever think about coming back, training, advising?" Alyssa looked toward the steel target still standing in the distance. Its paint faded, two faint dents still visible near center mass. "No," she said finally. "I think some lessons need to stay in the field, not in classrooms." He studied her profile for a moment. "You still carry it, don't you, everything that happened?" She didn't deny it. "You don't forget the range that teaches you who you are." Later that afternoon, she drove farther out, beyond the base, beyond the fences, to a quiet hillside marked by rows of white stones. She parked, walked slowly between them until she found the one she'd been searching for. The engraving was simple. Captain Thomas Trent, U.S. Marine Corps, FALUJH 2003. The bullet only knows physics. She knelt in front of the headstone, the dry wind tugging gently at her sleeve. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she placed a small object on the stone, the silver dollar. Its surface glinted once in the sunlight, then went still. "Hey, Dad," she whispered. Her voice was calm, steady, but the edges trembled with years she'd kept sealed. "I did what you taught me. I listened to the wind. I waited when others fired too early. And I stayed silent when noise would have been easier." A faint smile touched her lips. "I hit the target, Dad, twice. The wind stirred, warm and restless, moving the dust around her boots. She exhaled slowly. But it wasn't about the shot, was it? It never was. Her eyes lifted toward the horizon, the same horizon he'd once described to her as a child. The target changes, the range doesn't, that's what you meant. She closed her eyes and let the silence answer back. Flashbacks flickered through her mind like fading film. The blinding white of desert dawn, the tremor of her first impossible shot, the sting of cold water biting her hands, Walsh's face in the half-light, Blackwood's quiet respect, Rodriguez's steady loyalty. Each memory was a round fired into her own becoming. Each recoil a lesson. When she opened her eyes again, the world looked clearer, softer. The rage that once fueled her had turned into understanding. Not forgiveness, just peace. As the sun dipped low, a group of new recruits trained on the far side of the range. Their voices carried faintly on the wind, young, eager, uncertain. One of them, a woman barely out of her teens, struggled with her rifle's weight. Her instructor barked something sharp. She flinched. Alyssa watched quietly. Then, almost without thinking, she walked down the hill and across the sand until she was close enough for her voice to reach. "Try loosening your grip," she said gently. "Let the rifle settle into you, don't fight it." The recruit turned, startled. "Ma'am." "Breathe," Alyssa said. "Find your natural point of aim. The rifle will tell you when you're ready." The girl followed her advice, fired. The shot rang true, center mass at 300 meters. Her instructor blinked, impressed. "How'd you do that?" Alyssa smiled faintly. "I just listened." Then she turned to leave, disappearing into the shimmer of heat before the young Marine could ask her name. That night she camped near the ridge, beneath a sky bursting with stars. The desert was alive again, the hum of insects, the sigh of distant wind through brush, the rhythm of a world that kept moving long after stories ended. She built a small fire, the flames low and steady. On her lap lay her old notebook, weathered, pages yellowed, corners curled. She flipped through it slowly. Equations, wine charts, handwritten notes about patience, geometry, doubt. Then near the back, one final blank page. She took out her pen and wrote, "Truth is not loud. Precision is not mercy. And silence is not the absence of courage. It is the sound of it held steady." She closed the book, tucked it beneath her arm, and leaned back to watch the sky. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to aim at anything. The shot had already been fired. At dawn, she woke to the faint echo of gunfire from the range below. Cadets training, life continuing. She smiled, packed her gear, and started her engine. As she drove away, dust swirled behind the Jeep like smoke from an old battle finally burned out. She didn't look back this time. She didn't need to. Silver Creek had already taken what it needed from her and given her something better in return. A kind of calm no weapon could teach. A kind of strength no medal could name. Later, miles down the road, a radio crackled faintly through static. A reporter's voice drifted through the noise. Unconfirmed reports suggest that classified military reforms were initiated following the Silver Creek inquiry. Officials declined to comment. The anonymous cadet responsible for the exposure remains unidentified. Alyssa turned the radio off. The silence was cleaner that way. By noon, she reached the edge of a small town. A weather-worn sign read, "Marlow Ridge, population 624. There, in a rundown community center, she found what she hadn't realized she'd been looking for. A group of veterans teaching marksmanship to local kids, sons and daughters of those still overseas. No uniforms, no ranks, just guidance. When she walked in, an old sergeant looked up. "Can we help you, ma'am?" She smiled. "Maybe I can help you." He handed her a rifle. "You shoot." She looked down at it, the familiar weight, the promise, the memory. Once or twice. Hours later, as the sun set behind the hills, the kids gathered around her in awe. They didn't know who she was. They didn't need to. One boy asked, "Miss, what's the most important thing about shooting?" She thought for a moment, then said softly, "It's not about hitting the target. It's about knowing why you pulled the trigger." They nodded, not fully understanding, but they would someday. As the last light faded, she stood at the range's edge and looked toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, the wind whispered through another valley. Somewhere out there, another young Marine was being told what she couldn't do. Alyssa smiled. "Then show them," she murmured. "Show them how quiet looks when it's aiming." The world would keep spinning. Wars would keep being fought. Records would keep being broken. But for one woman on one forgotten range, the shot had already been taken. And it had hit something far beyond steel or distance. It had hit the part of humanity that still believed in calm over chaos, patience over pride. That night, the firelight flickered across her notebook one last time. She opened to the final page she'd written and whispered the words aloud. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." She smiled, closed the cover, and let the silence finish the story for her.